Hi, this is John and Hannah from Red Dice Diaries, and I'm hijacking this episode of the podcast to talk about court case dramas in RPGs. Last week, in my game, the players caught a villain who's been a recurring villain, and they've requested a court case.
Alright.
And I'm not quite sure how to handle this.
Okay.
Now, I've been online, and I've had a look at a couple of websites. I think I put court cases in RPGs into Google. So the first thing that came up was quite an interesting post on rpg.net from a user called, I think it's AOLD, AOLD, who suggested having 5 different designations of what's going on in your courtroom.
Is this like NPCs, is it?
Yeah, how to arrange your PCs and your NPCs, basically.
Okay.
With a defendant, a defence lawyer, a prosecution, a judge, and then maybe a jury.
So the jury would just be like one sort of
Yeah, and the thread went on in some discussion about whether or not there should be a jury. It was quite interesting. Go and have a look at rpg.net if you want to hear more about that. On another thread on a different website called storygames.com, which was about a proposal he was putting up. I think he was putting out feelers for a Kickstarter game, and I couldn't find whether the game actually ever got off the ground or not. But in there, a user called Tyler T suggested to him an interesting idea, which was to use scales,
like weighing scales,
pan scales, to show the judge and jury and how their opinion sways as the game goes on.
That's
which
quite
I thought
cool.
was quite a cool visual aid.
So would that be a case of I don't know, and also I've not seen the post you're talking about, so I'm just sort of guessing. Would that be the case of you have your scales and they're sort of balanced at the start, and then when the prosecution makes a good argument, you put a weight on their side. When the defence makes a good argument, you put a weight on their side, and at the end you see which side's tipping? Because that'd be pretty cool.
I think that was the mechanism he was suggesting. I suspect that in the game that I'm going to be running, it's going to be highly against the defendant.
Okay.
And one of the things that I found a lot of discussion of online was whether or not it's a good idea to actually put 2 hours of your game to a court case.
Yeah.
Because court cases in real life are really, really boring.
Yeah, and they're really long.
Can you get an interesting story out of it?
Well, I mean, I suppose the first thing I'd say is it depends on how interested you and your players are in it, and how much of a focus you want to be in your game. Because if the court case is just a background thing and it's based on what's going to happen after that, then make a couple of rolls, get the verdict, crack on with the interesting bit. But if the court case itself is the main focus of a session, then maybe you can spread it out a bit, but you've got to know that your players and obviously you are interested in doing that.
See, the interesting part of this particular court case, as far as the story goes, is that it's the first big court case that's going to take place sort of internationally on this world that's just discovered warp power.
If you don't mind me asking, can you give us a bit of background on the actual setup for the court case, just to help me understand it?
So when the world was in the process of discovering warp power, the player group was on a starship, and they were the group that was sent there to make first contact.
Right.
They watched the society for about 3 weeks, and during that 3 weeks, a sort of proxy war between 2 smaller nations escalated and very nearly became a nuclear war between 2 of the bigger nations.
Okay.
One of those nations had an extremely corrupt government, which was overthrown during the week that first contact took place. One of those government members, I think it's the treasurer, has been located and captured by the player group, who are now on a space station helping this like planet take its first steps into space effectively.
Okay.
They've previously set up some negotiations with like alien species, and they're helping them build the space station. And now this guy's come along and he's made it to the space station, which is technically international territory, and there's like these 3 different nations that are all vying for power on the planet, but who are all also facing the fact that they are very small fish in a very big pond, and if they don't work together, they're just going to get screwed over.
Okay.
So it's all about this villain and how they choose to deal with him effectively. I'm not quite sure how things will go like with the players in the game.
So is it the players trying to sue this like guy? Or
Well, the players have requested it because several of them, I've explained previously about troop roleplay. The players all have their own A character who is like a Starfleet character, but they also have lots of B characters. And several of the B characters are the world leaders. And the world leaders have like decided that this guy needs to be like put on trial.
So he's like becoming like the scapegoat.
Well, is he? You know?
Yeah.
So for a lot of like what's specific to coming up in my game, it's going to be about like how the court itself looks, how it works, and how much control of that I want to give to my players. And me being me, I'll probably like let them work out quite a lot of that. But I would like to have some sort of ideas in place about how to handle it. Obviously, this recommendation that I'd got from Aold on RPG.net sets out like the different roles that you can put a player group in. And suggests having like a defendant, a defence lawyer, a prosecution, a judge, and then having maybe a jury.
Okay, now, to be honest, if I was going to be doing it, I think that's a good idea, but if I was going to be doing it, I would cut it down to just like the prosecution and the defence. Mm-hmm. And then the easiest way I can think of doing it is basically if you pick a number, I know you're running this using fate, if you pick a number of successes, the one side has to get in order to like, yes, they've won the jury over, it's going to go in their favour. So let's say, just for argument's sake, I mean, you could change this number, let's say for argument's sake, 5. So what you do is you have them play out the court case. When they get to certain points, you have them make a roll. If they succeed, you like put like a tally mark in like their thing, and either the first one who gets to 5, they've swayed the jury to their side. That'd be the easiest way I could think of doing it. So if you pass me that red and gold Burning Wheel book from over there, though.
So I did also find a little note that said that the Duel of Wits on Burning Wheel was worth
that's
looking
literally
at.
just what I was about to look at. Do you want me to explain the Duel of Wits?
Yeah. Right, so Duel of Wits in Burning Wheel.
Okay, yeah, now bear in mind, this fairly involved system. I've not actually played a game of Burning Wheel that's used this because it's involved.
Right.
Now, just to explain, the way Burning Wheel works is it has a number of systems that you can use depending on the level of like granularity, depending on how much you want to zoom in on something. So it's like, to take combat, for instance. If you just want to quickly get through a combat, there's a system in here where you can just make one roll, like a fight roll, boom, combat dealt with, whole thing done. But then there's also a fight system, which is like, if you like say you're doing like the climactic duel against the main bad guy, you're fighting Sauron on his field or whatever, and that's a big part of the game. There's like a really like detailed system where you can go into like every single like parry and thrust of the weapon and stuff like that. Now the Duel of Wits is basically the detailed system for doing social combat. Now obviously if you want to do the not detailed version, you can use that one dice roll, happy days, it's dealt with. Now the idea of a Duel of Wits is you're simulating an argument and a debate. The aim of the whole idea is that if you win, you have convinced your opponent of your side of the arguments. And the idea of the back and forth is you're getting your opponent to sort of yield to various things. So your opponent might be like, oh yeah, okay, well I'll concede to that, but you know, you got to give me something in return, and it goes back and forth like that. Okay, there's like a buttload of different skills you can use with it, because Burning Wheel has like more skills than I've like ever seen in any role-playing game.
That's all right. My players have a diplomacy skill.
Indeed. So the way it works in Burning Wheel, you begin a duel of wits. There's got to be two sides, each willing to defend their own positions. Each side start, and this might be a good thing for you to do at the very start, just to get your player's mindset in. At the start of it, each side clearly states their case, like what they want. And that's your statement of purpose, it's called in Burning Wheel. Mm-hmm. So, for instance, it gives a couple of examples in here. The clan has always done right by itself. There is no need to become embroiled in the politics of outsiders. And then the other side saying, unless we all stand together, all will fall. This is not a problem for one province or one clan, but for all the clans of the land. So they're the two opposing points of view. Both sides then agree to the terms of the debate before continuing. This is like a bit of a metagame discussion. So if I win this, you agree to do X. If you win it, I agree to do Y. And you agree that before the actual thing starts. Then if you lose, you've already agreed this is what's going to happen, which again might be a good thing for your game. You know, you have both sides saying, like the prosecution saying, well, if we win, they're going to get this sentence. And the defence going, well, if we win, we want them to be acquitted and to be reimbursed for their time or whatever. And if you get that down at the start, there's no arguments later on, like when it happens. Okay, so a player can never be forced to engage in a duel of wits. If you wish, you can simply walk away from the challenge, refusing to debate the point. Obviously not really the case in your sort of situation. Rather than shed blood and break bones, we undermine points and damage egos in a duel of wits. So once the cases have been made, each side rolls their argument skill. They add any successes from the skill test to the lead character's will exponent. That probably won't make a lot of sense to you. This total is the body of the argument for this duel.
So handily enough, I came up with a mental-based combat system last time.
Brilliant.
So, yeah. So it'd effectively be a non-lethal version of that.
Yeah, and effectively, I mean, this goes into like a ridiculous amount of detail. I'm not going to go through it all because it's like hefty. Mm-hmm. But basically, you have a series of interactions which are effectively mental or social combat rounds. Mm-hmm. And you continue going on until you've like whittled away someone's like mental hit points. And when you've done that, you've won the argument, and whatever you agreed at the start, if I win, X is going to happen. That's what happens. If your opponent wins, whatever they agreed happens. So if you're going to do it during Fate, like say, set that out at the start, I'd say get your prosecution to say, all right, if the prosecution wins, we're calling for this sentence. If the defence wins, we're calling for this to happen. Then decide how many rounds of like combat you want to do. Play out the rounds using your social skills. Obviously people can use their aspects and whatnot to like add bonuses to it. Then when you get to the end of that number of rounds, make it like an odd number of rounds. Then when you get to the end, all you've got to do is go, who won the most rounds? And as long as it's an odd number of combat rounds, you're not going to get to the point where, unless you want it to be a possibility of there being like a hung jury or whatever, because then if you did, you could have an even number of rounds, and if you get an equal amount, you could decide something else happens. So that's how I'd do it, just to keep it like really simple.
So, yeah, that's a way it could work. What about for other games? Because obviously, so far we've been pretty specific on what game we're looking at.
Well, yeah, but I mean, obviously
would you consider running one in like your Middlelands game, for example?
I would. That's a good question, and like I don't think it'll happen. Now, it's not because I won't consider it. Don't get me wrong. If my player characters were like, oh, well, we're like in a court case or whatever, but bear in mind that my Middlelands campaign is like a standard sort of like OSR, like D&D sort of styley game. I mean, I know we're using Castles and Crusades, but it's in the old D&D style, and like player characters in D&D don't tend to end up in court particularly. It's normally a case of like someone oftentimes they might get arrested and like thrown in a jail or whatever, but they normally break out, they kill the guards that come to arrest them and ride off with the town burning behind them or whatever. They don't tend to end up in a court. But now you mention it, I actually do quite like the idea, because I think it's something that doesn't happen very often in like an old school style game. So I think Not at the minute for my characters, because they're in the settings version of Ireland in the Dolmen Wood, which is like a fairy sort of thing. But certainly when they get back to Great London, perhaps that's something I might introduce. Now, with Castles and Crusades, it doesn't really use skills, it uses like the standard attributes. And again, I'd probably do the same as I described for you there, but instead of having them use like their mental skills or whatever, I'd have them pick an attribute. And I'd be pretty flexible about what attribute I allowed them to use. So if they were like, oh, I'm going to try and like smooth talk the jury, yeah, you can make a charisma roll. Oh, I'm going to think back to previous like precedents of law, yeah, you can use intelligence. You can make a play for wisdom. So I think obviously you couldn't really use like the physical abilities, but yeah, I think it might be nice for the high intelligence characters to use their attributes.
Maybe you could, because there's also obviously many courts that have precedents for like trial by
ordeal and stuff like that.
Ordeal.
Yeah.
And
there is actually a handy bit about like crime and punishment and stuff like that in the main Midlands book. So yeah, it's definitely something I'd consider, and I actually quite like the sound of it now you mention it, because it's something that doesn't happen a lot in sort of D&D style games. So yeah, I'd definitely consider it.
Cool.
but as if my player characters would ever do anything that'd lead to them ended up in court. Oh.
So I'm thinking back to try and work out if I've ever actually played in any games that have done courtroom stuff, and I can only think of coming across it in LARP games.
Yeah, I can't think of any tabletop games.
Once, very long ago, in a World of Darkness game in a pub not too far from here.
Oh yeah.
But that unfortunately did suffer from that very first problem that we discussed, that a realistic sort of court scene is really, really, really boring.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the advantage that like, tabletop has over LARP, and that, because when you're doing a LARP, you tend to sort of like play out time as it's occurring, whereas in a tabletop you can be like, I'll make a few rolls, like 3 hours has passed or whatever, and you've been debating, this is what's happened.
And we've ended up at the medieval LARP that we do occasionally in front of various different sorts of judgment for various different things. Usually it involves a kick up the arse and a beer, but that's just that LARP that we do. That's how Lorien Trust play things.
Yeah, but no, I can't think I've been involved in a great deal of court cases, and I think, to be honest, that's because like the modern court cases as we know it is obviously like a more modern phenomena, and certainly myself, a lot of the role playing games I tend to run are sort of fantasy role playing games, like where you say court cases aren't such a big thing, or it's a modern day game. But if I'm running a modern day game, it's normally like a World of Darkness game where you're like a vampire or something. Obviously, you can't be like polling up to the court in midday if you're a vampire.
Well, not the real world court, but the... well, I don't know what it's like in the current edition of the World of Darkness. I know the Camarilla used to love doing everything around a court.
But that doesn't work in the same way as a mortal court.
In the sense of like a courtroom drama.
Yeah.
But certainly I've seen like bits of Camarilla games effectively trying to become a courtroom drama.
Yeah. I think it's interesting, and I mean, like you say, I think it comes down again to this idea of how much of your session do you want to devote to it. Because, like you say, like actually running through like blow by blow of a course. I mean, even Burning Wheel with its Duel of Wits, which I consider to be like a very detailed, very sort of like layered system, even that's nowhere near as complicated or lengthy as an actual like court case would be. So I think even sort of rulesy systems don't have that level of detail like you would find in an actual court case. But I think you could definitely do like a streamlined version, like we're saying, with like half a dozen tests or whatever, and a bit of obviously role playing and talking between the tests, and sort of get like the details, and get the flavour of it without the ridiculous length of time. I mean, certainly for your Fate game, you've obviously got like, you can roll to like create an advantage and get some free invokes. You could be like rolling to create an advantage by like, producing like a new piece of evidence or like something like that.
Well, I think one of the main problems that they're going to have is that if they choose any kind of a judge or jury from this world, then they're going to be extremely biased.
Well, in which case,
the Starfleet characters are going to have to be like quite uncomfortable with that.
Well, the thing is, in which case though, we know there are jury selection processes to make. Mm-hmm. I mean, I know because obviously I've been on a jury in real life. You go through a selection process to make sure that you're not biased. Then there's also cases where something's been found wrong with a jury or evidence has been mishandled. I mean, the trial that I sat in real life, it was the second time that trial had been held because some evidence hadn't been given to the defence to give them enough time to like work it into their argument, so they had to dismiss the whole case and reorganise it for like a few weeks later with a new jury and a new everything. So there's a lot of sort of different bits and pieces in there.
Mm-hmm.
Is there anything else you want?
It's also been useful to some of the people that are listening.
Yeah, and obviously if you've got any suggestions for court cases or any suggestions as to that Hannah could use in a game,
or future ideas for podcasts for us to do, things for us to talk about, let us know. Anything
you want to hear the two of us babble about, please let us know. There'll be details following shortly as to how you can do that. So from me and Hannah, we'll catch you next time. Take care.
Bye.
We hope you've enjoyed that episode. If you want to get in touch with us, you can drop us an email. The address is rddrpgpodcast@gmail.com. Or if you want to leave us a voicemail message, you can head over to our page on speakpipe.com, and that will allow you to leave a 90-second voicemail, and you might even be featured in a future show. There's a link to this included in the show notes, as well as a link to our website and other places where you can contact us. We hope you enjoyed the show, and we'll see you soon.